4:10? Is it 4:10 that we're scheduled to?
It says on your run, actually.
Does it? Oh, I'm sorry, 3:40, from 2:10 to 3:40. That's good. Hour and a half. We're getting started at 2:12. We'll begin with introductions.
Randy Solt.
George Martinez.
Cameron Perez Verdillo.
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Anna Brawley.
Christopher Constant, walking in as Daniel Volland. We also have Claire Ross and
OMB Director Ona Browse.
Suzanne LaFrance.
all right. So welcome everybody to the work session. As has been pointed out, this is a technically descriptive work session on the 120-day budget memo. And what it really is the kickoff, the formal kickoff, the first salvo in the budget process to get us to the end of the year with a fully adopted and implemented budget. So do we have anyone on the phone? We have Mr. Johnson.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, Mr. Myers.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. And I want to remind everyone the purpose of the work session is to learn from project sponsors and experts, as well as give assembly members an opportunity to ask questions and learn more about the process that we have before us, which is the 120-day memo. Thank you, everybody. I'd also like to especially thank OMB Director Ona Browse for the work that she is doing here to create a more collaborative budget process than we've seen, at least in the last 3 years. We're also joined by the mayor, who will allow the floor shortly. To kick us off, each year as part of the budget, the mayor is required by code to provide preliminary information regarding the mayor's proposed 2025 budget for general government, capital budgets, and utilities and enterprises, at least 120 days before the end of the fiscal year. We did receive this memo by email at the end of last week, which was within the code. Today, we'll have Director Browse give us a presentation on the budget and the outlook. And additionally, this will be our time as a body to review capital projects preliminarily that we might want to put forward and request for 2025. This includes road projects, park upgrades, library renovations, and more that make up the bond propositions that go to the voters, as well as requests to the Alaska Legislature, Alaska Congressional Delegation for state and federal funding support. We'll have a chance after Ms. Browse's presentation to dig into the capital projects. So let's get started with the goals today being a chance for the Assembly and the public to review the preliminary budget outlook presented by the administration and also do a first round of discussions for capital projects that we want to see. Madam Mayor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here to work with you all to serve the people of the municipality and move our community forward. So first, I want to recognize that budgets communicate our values and our priorities, and they tell the story of what's important to us. We approach the budget with the question, how do we ensure that the municipality of Anchorage is a place people want to live and are proud to call home? We came into office after a series of missed financial audits. As you know, it's made it challenging to budget strategically. This is why we've focused on the Act for Completion. It's why we've set aside significant time with departments. We wanted to start the budget process with a clear view of the situation. We are 26 days out from delivery of the budget to the Assembly on October 2. Today's work session is an important part of the budget conversation. The 120-day memo, as Chair Constant mentioned, is the first opportunity to talk about the budget for the administration to share priorities and get input from the Assembly. We are committed to using taxpayer dollars responsibly. We recognize the resource-constrained environment as we look to tackle some big challenges in the municipality. In the next 3+ weeks, we'll continue to work closely with departments to consider what we've heard from them and also to consider what we hear from you today from Assembly members to present a budget that prioritizes staffing up municipal departments to ensure effective service delivery, strengthening public safety so that residents feel safe in our streets and trails, implementing solutions to homelessness so we can get out of crisis mode and better utilize funds, making investments in our community's future. We want to build our future and ensure that the municipality of Anchorage is a great place to live for the next 10 years and beyond. And I want to note too, when we talk about making investments in our community's future, one theme that has emerged from the transition reports is the underinvestment in the municipality's fleet. And so, that will be an area of focus as well. When we deliver the budget to you all on the assembly, we'll include the administration's org chart, and we intend to present an org chart that accurately reflects the structure and work of the municipality and can also deliver on our priorities. Per assembly request, the 120-day memo includes all the expense and capital submissions from the departments. This is preliminary information and not the administration's final submission. Members will notice it does not include requests for life safety access roads or Chugach access service area projects. That will be forthcoming. We view our role as the administration in this process as focusing on delivering a balanced, responsible budget to the assembly. And we seek to build a budget that reflects our shared priorities. And again, we look forward to continuing to work with all of you on the legislative body and also the public to invest in our community and to ensure this is a place that we all are proud to call home. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, Ms. Browse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to ask, should we give pause for questions while we run through or wait until the discussion is all the way done?
Choose your own adventure.
Okay,
How do you want
adventure it is.
it? You didn't answer. How do you want it?
I think as we go.
Okay, fine.
Yeah,
Good. So
I
members,
think as we go.
start your engines.
Through the chair to the assembly members, thank you for having me here today. I'm very glad to be here to talk about the 120-day memo, which we have already established needs a new name, at least for purposes of public participation and acknowledgement of what the 120 memo is actually supposed to be about, which is that it is the report to the assembly and the public about the preliminary revenues and budget information for the municipality. I can't emphasize the word preliminary enough. These are the first pass at information that we get from the departments, from our finance column with revenues and projections. And we spend the next month refining all of this detail and determining how and where things should move based on what revenue actually looks like it will be realized as we move through the budget process. So you will see at least, I would imagine, 2 other versions of this information as we go over the next few months. I would like to run down the list of things that are included in the 120 memo. On the page 1, it says that it is comprised of the preliminary 2025 revenue estimate, the 2025 tax limit calculation, administration priorities and any major departmental changes, and capital improvement budgets and long-term capital improvement programs for general government, the utilities, enterprises, and a detailed project list, as well as the total estimated cost for funding. That also includes the preliminary utility and enterprise plans that are put into this memo every year. Are there questions on that? Cool. Continuing through, the preliminary revenue estimate is essentially flat. We've sort of balanced out a couple of wins and losses based on our preliminary projections, particularly the loss of the state community assistance that happened during first quarter. As of right now, the projection into next year is that we also will not have that coming to us from the state. We did have a small balance into sort of compensate for that loss, that the transfers, oh, I'm sorry, I inverted that. The decrease in revenue sharing and the decrease in the room tax are compensated by some of the offset in the MISA increases that we have seen from the utilities. And the overall 2024 numbers compared to the current projection for 2025 is about even. Questions on that?
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, so I guess I do have a question. It's a little bit skipping ahead, so we could save the tax cap discussion for later, but essentially this says that we're getting $8 million in less revenue But then if you fast forward, it says that we can collect more in taxes. So basically, the implication would be, depending on how the budget shakes out, that we would end up collecting more in property taxes, depending on what the budget looks like. Is that right? Because
Correct.
we would have a net loss of other revenue under the cap.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I think Anna just said it for me. The tax cap calculation incorporates the actual revenue loss because the tax cap increase, if you look at page B, page 1 of 1, which is the tax limit calculation, you'll see towards the bottom of the page, the limit on property taxes that can be collected within the tax cap from 2024 revised to 2025 preliminary is about a $12.5 million growth. That includes all of the projected revenues and the calculations that go into the tax cap based on population, based on CPI, based on new assessment or assessments on new construction, and also incorporates some of the general government use within the tax cap that is within the school district portion as well. So the significant growth that you'll see is the 3 million in new construction assessment, about line 27 of the page, and the increased real personal property taxes to be collected on line 2. We have projections and a decrease in CPI and population based on the last few years. So there is a little bit of a restriction, or I should say decrease in funding there.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, and it actually goes back to the first part, this discussion about revenue. And briefly, do you have a sense of why there's a decrease in the room tax?
For right now, it's just based on preliminary information and what we have coming back to us.
Just through the reportage, right?
Yeah.
And so I asked that question because there's a broad community conversation happening about shifting a substantial portion of our annual operating tax revenue from a property tax basis to a sales tax basis. The room tax is effectively a sales tax. And what we're seeing is a potential swing in the sum of millions of dollars from one year to the next. And so I just want people to contemplate what that means, right? Is that there is, right now, what we have is a strong basis to understand our revenues so we can understand our ability to budget, but for a pretty big chunk that is unpredictable because it is a sales tax based on factors outside of our control versus a stable tax base. So I just want to kind of start raising some questions that may come up in future conversations about the budget.
Yes, that's accurate. Property taxes are inherently stable and sales taxes are less so.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Braga.
Thanks. On the page B, 1 of 1, I feel like I should know this, but if the numbers are in parentheses, is that like a negative or? So I'm looking at the judgments, legal settlements you anticipate next year that there will be minus 2,455,000, like a lot less judgments.
Through the chair to member Braga, yes, the judgments and settlements are put into the tax cap and taken out of the tax cap every year. So the 2.45 was the inclusion of what was necessary to pay for judgments and settlements. As of right now, we don't have a number included for judgments and settlements because we don't have a solid amount that needs to be included in there.
So that's the number from last year, essentially. Just hold over. So yeah, thank you, Anna.
Yeah, I'll just note for clarity, that particular amount was the Hickle settlement. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the requirement is that those things are always above the cap if they meet that criteria.
Correct.
I think I have a slightly different opinion. I think that the answer is they may be the outside of the cap, and that it's this body's position, at least in recent memory, that those expenses should be outside of the cap. But I don't know that the attorneys would agree that they shall be outside of the cap.
The same way that, when an emergency is declared, that a collection outside of the tax cap is made optional based on whatever the dollar amount need is. Judgments and settlements, I think, can be considered the same way. They don't have to be accommodated outside of the tax cap, but they usually are because they are one-time costs that may or may not be significantly larger in one year over another.
Last note on that, and it's because they can't be anticipated, right? That's why the charter contemplates them to be allowed outside the cap. You can't budget for that which you don't know is coming. Mr. Myers and then Ms. Brawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question comes back to actually your statement about the sales tax being fluctuating, I guess, because you can't really project that based on tourism and people buying, I guess, the economy overall, but it's all under the tax cap. So if there's less sales tax generated, the deficit would be made up with the property tax.
I think that would depend on the actual structure of how a sales tax would be incorporated under the tax cap. So I would need probably a little more information in order to understand if that would be something that can be done.
Okay, that's what was my understanding, what was being worked on with
I'll be happy to talk with you about
2% would be under the tax cap.
that, Scott. Yeah, so it moves the money outside of the cap. The cap reduces, and then we operate with that reduced cap and an annual revenue basis of sales tax money. So once it's outside of the cap, once that cap is shrunk, it is no longer available. You can't just return. Okay, Anna.
Thanks. Comment and a question. Comment, I just want to again point folks to the fact that when we lose population, we have to cut our budget. That is a requirement in the way it's built. That's not a policy choice. But I had a question though about the new construction. So I understand that's essentially contemplating that there are buildings that aren't completed or aren't on the rolls now. By the end of that coming year, they would be. So, but what is that number based on? And then I also just want to point out that it's gone down significantly since last year even.
Correct. And actually, if I recall correctly, the 2024 number was significantly higher than it has been in the last 5+ years. So a slight decrease or $1 million decrease as it is represented here is appropriate given the sort of trends we have seen. What is the assessment based on? It is based on what you said it is, Member Brawley. It's based on the new construction that has not been completed in the year, but when they do that calculation is in the first quarter. So those numbers are actually refined in the first quarter budget process, and all of these numbers are refined in the first quarter budget process, but that one in particular takes into account the actuals that appraisal has gone through for 2025.
And I guess my question though is like, because I know that number, I think it's based on real projects, right? So where is it coming from? And then I guess, are they just things in partial completion or are they things that have just been permitted, or that's what I'm trying to understand.
Through the chair, I believe that Jack Adamus, our municipal assessor, gives a presentation towards the end of the year that includes all of that specific detail that can identify where that's coming from and potentially what parts of town, et cetera.
Mr. Salt.
Same topic. So my guess is this is a better estimate because we already have the plans. We know it's going to be a 3-bedroom, 2,000 square foot house, which you just plug into the appraisal process. It spits out a fairly accurate number. Correct?
Through the chair, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So I put myself in the go on the same topic. That what strikes me though is that a tax levy is done on January 1 at midnight, right? So whatever the status of the property is at midnight on January 1 is the status for the year, right? So if a new construction project came online in June, isn't that not really subject to the full tax, meaning the certificate of occupancy until January 1 the following year? So it's not exactly to say that that's anticipated properties that are going to somehow increase our tax base this year at Q1 or any other time, because the levy is midnight on January 1.
I believe that they can go through their revision process through site visits, et cetera, to see what the actual condition of the properties are during the timeframe they are finalizing the assessments, but I would leave that question to Jack.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just don't think there's a way to, in the middle of the year, increase the property's value for the current year's tax purposes.
There is not, to my knowledge.
Otherwise, someone would have figured it out. Okay, anyone else?
Tried.
All right, let's proceed. Thank you.
Where were we? Let's see. Tax limit calculation, we did not go over specifically the new revenues. Would you like to go through the page 1 of 1 that goes line by line through any of the increases or decreases that we're currently projecting? Right now, the preliminary numbers for the tobacco tax have a slight increase based on the collections that we have seen come through. The PILT is slightly lower based on our actuals from this year. The MISA is slightly higher because our net plant assessments for our utilities and enterprises has increased. I would note that our MISA assessments are built on our financial information, and so we have some challenges in that area as far as ensuring that our net plant assessments are accurate until we have gone through more of our ACFR process. But for the time being, that is how they are projected in our current understanding. The room tax is slightly lower. The state and federal revenues is lower, particularly based on the community assistance. Program fees and interest, $100,000 less, and transfers from other funds, which is made up of the funding that was transferred in at first quarter for the PERS liability associated with the ML&P sale, and another slightly smaller transfer from finance that usually occurs. Marijuana sales tax up.
So I have a question. I don't see anyone else. Oh, Karen, go ahead first.
Does the room tax include Denina and Egan rentals for conference? Is that hooked in there?
Through the
No?
chair, I don't believe so. That's part of their operating revenue, I believe, is through their contracts.
To the third party.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not ours. Right. So I have a question, and I bet you have it in here somewhere, but it kind of, the MISA line kind of made it pop out. So IGCs and how we manage that. What comes to mind is we have seen a substantial increase in costs for utilities, costs for, electric bills and gas bills and all those other things. Are those reflected in the budget somehow where we're increasing the funds that are required to pay those increased costs by the various entities? So will we come to that in here somewhere?
No, they are not included in this. That is included in the actual budget for the departments. So the calculations associated with the costs to pay IGCs are included in the budget of the department that they come from.
So we'll see it effectively reflected in the full budget package once we get there.
Correct.
Okay. So, and I think at some point, some education to those of us, even who've been around a long time, on the function effect and how that whole thing is, that mystical box called IGCs would be very valuable.
It is on our list for discussing in one of these work sessions throughout the budget process, and or if we need a standalone work session, that's fine too.
Okay. It's, yeah, the magic hat thing. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, let's proceed.
Okay. We want to talk about the capital budget. It's very exciting. It's very large. This year, we did something slightly different than I believe has done in the past. At the request of the Assembly, we wanted to give more time to have the conversation about what capital projects are included in the bond that goes on the ballot in April, but also to have feedback directly from the body to understand what the position may be on the full departmental requests. So instead of this being a preliminary bond offering, this is the full list of department proposals for potential bond package projects. So you'll see the total at the bottom of C1, page 1, the 2025 capital improvement budget is 111 million for bonds. That is not the number that we are proposing for bonds.
I guess we got to add the school district in there. We get up to 200 million this year.
This includes all of the departmental proposals that we received moving through the budget meetings with the mayor and the department directors and their budget analysts. So they compiled the full list of what they recognize as their departmental need, and that is what is included in this initial preliminary information.
So, any questions? Okay, Ms. Burley.
Yeah, and I realize this actually bridges the other topic too, but before we get further, can you clarify where the school district budget fit, like really high level, how that fits into because we don't see any of that in this. And then also just, and again, noting that that's a separate bond too. So can you just clarify like kind of why we don't see it in here?
The school district receives a portion of our tax cap, and so that is reserved for them. And the bonds that are approved for school district are treated the same way the bonds that are approved for the municipality. So as they're approved, it increases the amount available under the tax cap to them. So you won't see that in here, but you will see it when the ASD budget comes across for approval next year. Is that when it comes? Yes. So the consideration for us here is to remember that the school district will likely have a bond of a certain dollar amount that we will know before we move into finalizing our information as much as we can, so we can take into consideration the full impact for the voters.
All right, so I have myself in the queue now. Two questions, or one request and a question. So this is an export of a document from, I'm guessing, SAP, no, from your budgeting process, your budgeting software.
From Questica.
Questica. Can this export include a column that is Assembly District?
I believe the answer is yes, but that is actually on our list. As part of the capital work session that we had earlier, that was included in the list of requests. And I think the note that I can give to you is that this document is presented in the way that we have traditionally presented 120 memo information historically. I'm working with PM&E and other people within Public Works to determine what the appropriate sort of documentation is that would include that information. I think that we'll see a version of that as we move through the budget process. We will have a map and be able to identify some of the other detailed information that members have requested so that they can have a more comprehensive sort of view of what is included and what is out.
Right.
And the capital budget book traditionally comes with page by page descriptions of what each of the projects are that are in the program for the initial year and the 5-year program.
So I can tell you constituencies of mine get really offended, especially Fairview, when Ben Boki ice upgrades, for example, is included as a district or council priority when it's a citywide value. It has nothing to do with what their interests are. And so and I can understand why having the district on the projects that are selected is more valuable, so people can understand the equitable distribution of actual proposed investments as opposed to the whole list of all the things that people have identified. Now, that gets me to my second question, and this is a question probably outside of the scope of this briefing, but this list is long and it has a ton of items on it, and in particular, roads and sidewalks. Historically, we've had meaningful investment from the state to maintain our roads and sidewalks, and that investment is gone. And the more you drive around town, the more you realize our infrastructure is failing. Our roads are potholed, and it's starting to feel like we are a different kind of country than we hope to be. And so I'm wondering if this list, as it's drafted, kind of actually captures the road and sidewalk needs or not, when people are looking at this $100 million number and thinking that's a lot of money. I wonder if we have a process that is beginning or getting underway that we can start to do an assessment to understand the deferred maintenance problem we're facing and the scale of it, because I don't know that we can actually tackle the issue until we understand.
I believe that there are efforts underway to compile much of that information. I actually think we have a fair amount of it available. I would imagine it is a very large, unrealistic number, but to understand what it is, you're right, that is something that we need to know in order to know how we're going to get there. I have planned for part of the budget process to include the historical information associated with state funding, not only the community assistance and revenue sharing dollar amounts, but the capital amounts that have come through the legislative capital budget process over the years, because it is significant. The combination of the two of them can be over $50 million in any given year for historical timeframe, and losing that and never regaining it under the funding that we have available to us means that our deferred maintenance is very large. Understanding what that loss has been and what it looks like is going to help us understand how we plan for the future.
Yeah, and just a specific example, I was dropping a document off at a business in Midtown, and there was a sidewalk at a major corner of town that was absolutely exploded. Giant pieces of cement just all over the place. The sidewalk is no longer passable. It looked like something dropped from the sky and just destroyed it. And it's like, if this is starting to happen across town, we have to get ahead of this somehow. But I would argue that snow maintenance equipment is probably first priority. So, okay, thank you, Anna.
I will pick up here and address one of Member Brawley's comments from earlier, and that is the state column in this whole list. The book that includes all of the funding that we are suggesting will be either requested or received from the state in order to achieve some of these projects. I think based on the detail and funding that we have gotten from the state over the last 10 years, our expectation is that almost none of those projects would be funded. They exist as a historical measure from the legislature to understand what is accessible within their districts to fund when they have capital funding at the state level. And the decrease in activity on what used to be called the Blue Book, which was basically the giant Sears catalog of projects available for the Anchorage area that legislators could look to determine how they would be able to spend their available funding, is no longer part of the process. It is, I don't know what the total capital investment we've received from the state is over the last 5 years, but it is very small. So part of the identification of these projects being in the state column is to say they are not necessarily the highest priority that we would need to put on a bond, but that if people are looking for projects to fund, that those would be the next sort of step. I think it's going to be a bit of a process to get to the place where we are actually identifying the long-term fund source for some of these. But while we roll through our traditional process, bonds are the option.
Just a note on it, if you push that mic back just a little bit, it will stop clipping on you. Anna.
Yeah, so this is where this intersects with another big topic that's outside the purview of this work session, which is the legislative program. But I do want to note, that I know, so I guess years ago, well, a few years ago, the ask to the legislature was really one thing. It was just the port. And I imagine there were these other projects, but that wasn't the emphasis. And then last year's legislative program, we tried to both be targeted, but also not unreal, or we tried to be targeted, but also really clearly communicate what you said, which is, the state has pulled back investment. And so we need these things, whether or not they want to pay for them, or somebody else pays for them. So partly I'm saying that just because we're about to start that conversation as well. We have district level priorities in there. I don't think most of those got funded. I don't know how strongly we collectively advocated for those. And I also know that there were several things that I think were on our list or someone's list that got funded and then got vetoed. So there's that factor too. So I guess it's partly just to flag this for another conversation, but to say we need to start squaring up what goes in here, which is the bigger list, and it's the 6-year list and the 1-year list. And then what we ask the state for, and then not just the, as you said, the blue book, or what I was calling the buffet menu of here's things that we would like with no prioritization or clear communication of what those should be. And so that is partly our collective responsibility as the assembly to make that clear and to advocate for that during session. And it's also the administration's responsibility to set those priorities, and you all advocate for that. So I know we're moving ahead to that, but I just want to flag that. And then also just to say that I think we should continue thinking about, making sure that we have the full list and that that's communicated, and also that we don't just give them a menu of 6 years of priorities for them to cherry pick. Because what I also have seen is that it tends to go to South Anchorage and Eagle River absent any other kind of prioritization. So which is not inherently bad, but it just means some districts get more than others because that's the way the legislature operates. So it's just true. I mean, it is. It's the things that weren't vetoed also. So anyway, all that to say, I just want to flag this for members and for the administration that we need to continue working on this and think about not just this, but also what we do for the incoming session.
Anyone else? No, okay, let's move on. Oh, there is. Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned the column by districts. Another aspect in that is area wide.
Yes.
Could you put that in there, please? Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that was my point about the arena getting funded. That's not a neighborhood interest, a district interest. It's an area-wide interest, even though the funding source might be different. So, yeah, thanks. I think it's very important information.
And through the chair to Member Littlefield, I believe that having both of those pieces of information next to each other to say they're physically located in this district, but they are accessed area-wide is the way that we would be able to understand exactly what the impact is.
You think we're on track to get it done with the time we have? Ona?
You mean this conversation?
All right.
Yeah.
This round. Okay, you're on.
Mostly, I just want to know if you guys have any questions about the information presented.
Go ahead, Mr. Wand, Daniel.
I'm just not, well, I guess we have until 3:40. Is that what time?
Yes,
So
we
we
have
do-
about an hour, just under 50
Okay.
minutes.
I don't want to get too far ahead then. Well,
I think what Ona just signaled is that it's free form, open
perfect.
session. Now let's
love
ask the questions you might have, because I think her
so
presentation's roughly done.
Member Brawley and I have expressed interest in being more ambitious with the traffic calming and safety improvements. And we're kind of exploring how we want to do that. So essentially, and I'll ask Anna to speak to this too, but my understanding is that around 2 million gets us back on track with current projects. We've asked the municipal traffic director to give us a list of the projects. You guys have seen that qualified list and which ones have been completed. Some of them have already been completed. And then there's like the backlog of qualified projects. And so we've asked the traffic department to break that down by amounts for each intervention. They have the list of each neighborhood. And then beyond that, beyond that, there's also a long list of cold projects. And so they work through all of the qualified ones first, and they use different mechanisms to prioritize them. Things like the 85th percentile rule, which is kind of a wonky traffic thing. But what ends up happening is that there's this call to community councils to nominate their projects, but a lot of them end up with none of their requested projects being prioritized because they don't meet that maybe they're not the most dangerous, if that makes sense. So all that to say is I would like them to bring forward the outstanding list of qualified, and then we just fund the entire list of qualified projects. In a recent meeting that we had with Brad and Becky, it sounded like that would be around $10 million. So looking at whether we put that on the roads bond or do we do a standalone bond, I'm still kind of working out those details and want to continue to have that conversation with the administration and see what they think is the best path forward. But just kind of want to put that out there, socialize the idea, claim that space. And maybe Anna wants to comment too. Did I get that all right?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dan summed it up really well, but yeah, it's the trade-off of we're so far behind on those and everybody wants traffic calming in their neighborhood, obviously, and then balancing that against these other priorities. So we just want to put it out there, just knowing that it is a big number, but we can make a lot more neighborhoods safer, so.
Okay, I have Ms. Brong and Mr. Salt. Ms. Brawley.
I thought you said Brawley, I'm sorry. So on page 19, where we have Chugach State Park access improvements, is that the CASA bond from last year, or are we anticipating that we are creating more access? Just wanted that explained.
That's funded, sorry, that's funded or that's listed in the state column, but I believe once we determine what the projects will be, it will move.
Okay, so I just was making sure it wasn't what we spent for the Sunnyside parking. This is something that you anticipate coming from the state for this upcoming year.
No, that's not something I'm aware of, but I can ask PM&E.
All right, sorry, Mr. Salt.
So, Member Vol and Dan touched on it, but like, I seem to remember in the past when we had safety improvements as a line item, there was also supplemental information so we could see each one of those projects. Is that coming or, okay?
Yeah, through the chair to Mr. Salt, that will be included in the actual capital budget proposal. So there are 3 binders that'll come at you in 26 days. One, the giant general government operational budget. One is the municipal enterprise and utility budget. And one is the capital budget that has all those individual pages with the specificity around the projects. I believe we do have that available. If you would like to see it now, we can produce it, but it will be the listing of these things. I would welcome members to review the list that's presented in the 120 memo and determine, if there are things that you can tell from the information presented are of interest to you, let me know, please. We want to know what projects you're interested in. We want to know what projects you're interested in your district, in other people's district. If you think that there are benefits for the entire community around specific ideas, please give us feedback on what this is. That is the point of presenting this document the way that it is to say, these are all the things that are prioritized from our departments, and we want to know how this fits in with the identity that we want to present going forward for the mayor and for the assembly and the districts that you represent.
So was that the answer? The answer you want? Randy, okay, thank you. I'm going to put Mr. Presverdia before Ms. Brawley.
Just a question on that. Be interesting to put in there like a little number for the district. Is there already? Does it like on each little thing? I wonder if that's really hard to do on all the different sort of the current projects, right? So that I would be easily be able to sort those and go, here are the 12 projects that are currently on in my district. And then as we propose them to you and you produce a list of those to kind of have a sense of that. So I don't know if that's already there, if there's an indication of that, but I was just looking through them here and I was trying to figure out, okay, is that in mine or is that not? And where is that at? So.
Through the chair, I believe that there is a map included in each of the budget books from the previous years that we can include, maybe compiled what's currently active as opposed to what was approved in the given year.
Yeah, I've seen the
but
map. I'm thinking more of like on a list, You know,
Oh,
if you-
okay.
if you,
Yep.
if you see a list of all of the different priority projects and there was a designation for each one of what district it was in, I don't know if that's too hard to do, but I'm just saying that that's a nice thing to have so
Yep.
that I would be able to look through the list and not have to go to a map and figure out if it is in my boundary or not. So.
Through the chair, I hear that. Definitely sorted by district is probably the best way to do it too.
Well, yeah, that, it might actually
We don't
not.
want 'em- I just
Yeah,
mean-
I would say maybe do it that way, but then since you've generated it, do a sort and then send it to members by district separately. I don't think you need it both ways in the budget book. But yeah, I think it's a good idea anyhow. I miss Polly.
So I'm glad you brought up CASA, Ms. Bronga. So I guess it's a question for, and I know you mentioned that there'll be, you talked about a column. I know Member Zalatel has advocated for listing that out as a type of bond. And then the other one is the cemeteries. Because I remember the CASA projects had assembly sponsors last year. I don't think the cemetery project really did. I think it was more of a community-led thing. And both of these are service areas that exist now. So I guess it's probably a question to you guys on both CASA and cemetery, what you anticipate at this point, and then also to the sponsors who were tracking that from last year. Are you guys going to bring those projects forward again, or kind of what might that look like? Because I don't know if any of them are in here. Thanks.
We're having a little trouble getting a meeting scheduled. To be perfectly honest.
I think you have through November. So TikTok, Mr. Littlefield.
Thank you, Chair. The general government fleet vehicle replacement, you have two figures. You got 2 million and you got 5.25. And on the other, where's the other coming from? I believe that we really need to get in sync with replacing our government fleet, or we're going to be running nothing.
Through the chair to Mr. Littlefield, I agree with you. I believe the mayor agrees with you too. That the fleet is actively being discussed on how to accommodate the delayed maintenance that has occurred and the actual need associated with performing the services within the municipality. So there is a much larger conversation about what a general government fleet improvement plan looks like, what a APD fleet improvement plan looks like, what a maintenance and operations snowplow fleet improvement looks like, and how that would be presented, whether or not that would be part of the traditional bond information or preliminary information that comes in the 120 memo. I will tell you that it is under discussion, as well as Member Brawley's comment about the cemeteries. That is also in discussion. One of the things that we have talked about is this idea that there is a sort of standardized list of bonds that traditionally go on the ballot, and whether or not that actually encompasses all of the bondable needs within the municipality, and how, if we have conversations about how the cemetery actually needs something, we should have a plan and how to get it funded, as opposed to churning through the traditional 5 categories of bonds that we have.
I have myself, and thank you, Ms. Bond, on the topic of fleet. I've been having a conversation with Ms. Browse now for a couple of years. And this predates any conversation from AEDC, so it's separate, but it kind of modeled on the technology tax levy that we put forward that is supporting the body worn camera implementation. I think once we have a replacement plan, I would and already have some work drafted on putting forward a proposal to the voters, a special levy that would get us caught up over a series of years with our fleet across all of the units, the police, snow, general fleet. That would be a special levy proposal that would be a time limited or more aggressive upfront, and then a trickle down once we get to the point where we have our fleet at a point where we're no longer deferring maintenance till 1980 something, or from 1980 something. So just from a theoretical and applied conversation in the future, it is a project that I have working in the hopper that would get us ahead. But obviously we want the administration in front on that and telling us what our needs are as we come towards a solution. So Mr. Wall, go ahead.
Through the chair to Mr. Littlefield, if you have any ideas based on your experience, I would be more than happy to sit down with you and talk about it.
Yeah, I want to fund it. You tell us what to do. They need your input. Mr. Bond.
Thank you. One thing I would love to talk about is alleyway improvements. I think it's really timely. I get requests, as you know, I recently forwarded one on to you. There's lots of alleys in my district, and some of them still are unimproved. Quite a few of them in Fairview and Mountain View still unimproved, but in South Addition too. And so I think it's interesting to think about what's the best mechanism for assembly members to highlight the ones that are in need when we get those constituent requests. It's also really timely because we are working on that project that my colleagues will be aware of, the site access revisions with the planning department. And are there going to be different design standard requirements on improved alleyways, right? And one of the things we hear a lot from builders, when we think about our new construction, is the cost of those offsite improvements, right? Sometimes if they want to put in a triplex, well, then they have to pave the whole alleyway, right? And so how can the municipality be a good partner in development? And so I know that Chelsea Ward Waller is trying to get more research and more insight into how those various alleyways are prioritized and what that programming looks like. But thoughts on that, if there are kind of urgent ones that we want to raise to the fore, what should we do?
Through the chair to member Voland, I think what you have done is what you should do. You contact Ms. Wardwaller, myself, and the municipal manager. Let us know that those things are happening. Let the mayor's office know where your priority list is. I think that the more people who are aware of the needs, the easier it is for us to recognize how things should be prioritized.
Is there opportunity? Because it's one of the ones where the department kind of has broader discretion, right? So we fund traffic calming, or we fund school safety. We fund this category. We don't necessarily always break it down by project. You can get into that more granular level, but it's really more the department kind of choosing those projects. So if there are ones that are our priorities, I mean, is it appropriate to move them into the CIB, or like what's the mechanism? If we say, we feel pretty strongly on behalf of our constituency, we want to fund this alley, how do I bring forth an amendment to effectuate that?
Through the chair to member Voland, I would need to speak with maintenance and operations and PM&E in order to understand specifically how their individual mechanisms would work, and whether or not they would roll into either individual projects or into the buckets of funding, as you have mentioned. When they are in that sort of group listing, the way that I have seen it done in the past is that the inquiry is made as to, is this on the list? Can it be on the list? Is there funding that might be available to do this? And depending on how the annual list is broken down and what the priority is, I think it's a sort of catch as catch can. If the funding is already available, if it's not, then it can be put into the queue based on the actual need. I would assume that when these are communicated to assembly members and to the mayor, that we are sort of aware of how dire the circumstances are and can make either specifically life safety decisions, but also just sort of, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are we at?
Ms. Brawley, then Ms. Bronca.
Thanks. So going back into planning, one observation that I have with the age of our fleet is the number of miles. And that is one of the many consequences of building a very spread out city that we have to service, and that we've built more than we can afford to maintain, to Mr. Constance's point earlier. All that to say, housing production is on my mind, and I know it's one of our big priorities. And that is related to, earlier today we were talking about offsite improvements and just the general principle of we are putting infrastructure investment in places where we expect to see more development and or where there is denser housing or just more people living in that area. So one planning principle would be to put all of our investments in the urban core. I know that's not what's going to happen, because that's not the only consideration when we're talking about the entire city. But I just want to put it on the table to see what appetite there might be for better tying or more tying our infrastructure decisions, this whole list, at least with road projects and things like that, with where we either want more housing, where we put incentives to have more housing, and or just places that are closer to the middle of the city versus equally spreading them out in all areas. And I also acknowledge there's an implication for different districts, right? But I just wanted to put that on the table, see what your thoughts are, and also if members have thoughts on that too, because I think it's a balancing act between spreading out the money, but not spreading it out so thin that we don't have an impact.
Through the chair to Member Brawley, I will say that I am not the one who is responsible for the housing situation or recovery from it within the municipality, but I do spend a lot of time focusing on how municipal operations go. And we have had that specific conversation about how even our infrastructure is spread out all over town. And it means that, you know, if you are a police officer who has to get a record, you have to drive all the way across town to get something specific and then drive all the way back to where your desk is. And that is not necessarily an efficient use of time or money. And what does that look like when we are scattered across in different areas? And so sort of streamlining that attention to say, if we are making investments moving forward, can we pay attention to that specific issue? Because it only gets more expensive.
So I had myself and then Mr. Martinez. I just would point out, I didn't make the point that we've built more than we can maintain. That point continues to be made well by Ms. Brawley. My point was, I don't think we have a plan to maintain what we have, and we have to figure out how we're going to do it because it is what we have. And so I think we have a responsibility there. And since he's here, Brenda Babb from the I team is in the room. And I just want to say that I know that's okay, but you sparked a very important conversation for me that I've been having, that, you know, we've been in discussions about the kind of open checkbook or online checkbook and open government portal. And I pointed to some local government services that are really good outside of how we demonstrate this information. And so while you can go to the OMB page and download a link to a PDF of the budget, I'm looking forward to the day where we actually transform this budgeting process so a member of the public can go to a map, look at their neighborhood, see the project that's coming, identify the project manager, and then make contact. And so I know that we have this available because I've seen the planning department show us. And so now part of this process over the next couple of years, hopefully, is how to integrate all of those pieces into a truly functional portal for the public to understand what we're doing on a regular basis.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I agree. And I think the, you know, OMB has already started conversations about how and what a sort of more understandable piece of paper and can be presented to the public, so it's not a 600-page binder of information that means really not a lot to people unless you understand municipal operations to begin with. People want to know what they're paying and where their money is going, and presenting that in a consumable fashion is probably the most important communication that we can make. So that is coming soon.
That'll teach Mr. Babb to just come do homework in a assembly work session. So just on the record, Mr. Babb says it's happening, it's underway, and we'll figure it out because it's been requested and they're working on it. So just to, that was a paraphrase of what Mr. Babb said. But so anyhow, thanks for coming. I think next in the queue, I have Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Chair. Just a reflection and possible recommendation back to staffing and fleet specifically, and thinking of those elements of the fleet that we've had deficiency in and how they impact operations, and then also the relationship between the deficiency of staffing within those same units. I think it'd be really compelling to have those two vantage points really communicated effectively to the impact of what people can expect with our current state meets if we're fully up to snuff. I remember the conversations, sometimes they were often not well thought out, but they were presented as, this is the situation we have today. What do you want us to invest in if you want the impact that you want to see? And those tough choices often people are not necessarily really aware of. And so just making that real clear connection, especially as we put it out to advocating, thinking of the way we want to fund or bond for bigger packages, I don't think the public necessarily has the clearest relationship to the impacts that they experience. So when people often complain about high property taxes, I often think they're thinking about the value that they're receiving first. And then it's, the question of the amount. And on that front, I remember a few years ago, and it's probably still around, but I haven't paid attention to it if it is, there was a countdown on the landfill, the ticker. And that might be a really good way to graphically communicate fleet life, where we are today. I remember these presentations that we've had recently are very enlightening to us to see it graphically, but just a way for the public to begin to understand where our investments are with respect to the fleet versus today, like with a ticker, because we're probably terrible at the ticker today. And that would be something really aspirational with advocacy to see count down, knowing that that means we're getting better fleet, means we're going to get better service.
Through the chair to Mr. Martinez, I think that the ticker idea is great. And we have had conversations internally about how the menu of options that need attention is very long, and how they have not necessarily been discussed in a robust fashion or with potential solutions attached to those problems. So one of the things that we will be focusing on for this budget process and beyond is bringing the assembly the information that is, these are the issues we have in front of us. These are potential solutions. They don't necessarily need to be decisions that need to be made that moment, that day, but being able to understand all of the pieces that are moving and that need that focus and potential funding is how you will be able to make the best decisions moving forward. Some things will be able to be delayed a little bit, or there are other funding opportunities. But if we don't have a sort of more comprehensive look at what those things are, or at least we may not understand all of them in one place, we will be making less, I don't know what the right word is there, we're making worse decisions.
We'll knock the worst decisions out. Answered. All right. Other members? Ms. Bronca, that's right. I have you on my list. Go ahead.
Hi, so on the page C1, 1 of 1, I see public transportation is not on there, and that caught my eye, but then it's back here at D3. And I'm just wondering that I have a few. One, why is it not in that initial list? And then I was also thinking about health department and.
Through the chair, to Member Bronca, the transit department did not submit a capital budget specifically because they have the funding that they need and the resources going forward for this next year.
Okay.
The challenges associated with operations at the center, or not the transit center, the transit department, and not having enough staff to run bus lines is still something that we are working through to determine what the impacts of that are. It would be included in the D section because that is the longer term program, so is not just the 1 year offering, which is 2025.
Health department, like I see other places where there's facility improvements, and I know that they are talking about significant building problems. And I'm wondering if they just didn't submit for that or what happened there.
Through the chair to Member Bronca, right now the health department has ARPA funding for some building rehab that they're working through with M&O. There is a portion of their new budget proposal does include some maintenance that would be necessary for the building on a life safety issue, but we believe that that can be accommodated via the budget process as opposed to through bond. And outside of that, I think the health department would, need a whole building.
Bronca, go ahead.
The other thing on D3, page 7 of 27, it's pool filtration system and building controls. And I was kind of wondering why that's not in the Parks and Rec. I think of pools as Parks and Rec, but
Through the chair to Member Bronca, maintenance and operations does all the pool maintenance. It does not go through Parks and Rec.
at the beginning, Mayor LaFrance, you said that your budget reflects a lot of value of the community, and you said something about homelessness. And where in here is that addressed, or that's just coming in?
Battery's dead, so why don't we swap out mics? You have one. Oh, right, there you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Member Bronga. That's an intentional statement. And at this point, what we have is what the departments have presented. And so we'll continue to look at the critical needs that the departments have brought forward, as well as, in light of how we're going to address some of these big issues. So that's not reflected yet in what you have, but it's top of mind as we prepare our budget for you all.
I appreciate it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, this is, but for the first couple of pages, which are the broad strokes, this is capital improvement program, not operation. So I had been searching a little bit and realized that that's not part of this. That's part of the actual budget.
And Mr. Chair, if I just may say, I did initially mention operations because I thought we had top line figures and we don't. So
Yeah, so I think a number of those items will show up when we get to the operating budget part of the conversation. So this is heavily weighted towards capital. And I had myself in the queue, then Ms. Brawley, Ms. Bronga, just this morning, I appealed to the administration to provide for the assembly a kind of robust and thoughtful analysis of the needs of the animal care facility, because we haven't seen it. And I really want to see it so we can get a program going that will, if it's a whole new building, replace a whole new building. And so we can start to tackle the fact that that building serves what the 1980s thought Anchorage needs, and we're now 2024. So I share your thoughts. And in fact, just this day had that very conversation with the team upstairs. So I doubt we'll see it reflected in this year's budget, because the first process will be conduct a needs assessment and understand the problem. But I share that thought with you. Ms. Brawley.
Thanks. So we talked about state, we talked about bonds. The other column in here is federal, and I'm going to say thank you to Claire for prompting this conversation or this question. So, because I'm looking through, obviously AMATS is federal money, so it makes sense that's in the column. I know there's a few other scattered things, and probably those have specific reasons. Given how much federal money there is out there, basically this connects back to the grants conversation. So I know we're not going to get a bunch of grants in the next 2 months because we don't have time to do that. But kind of looking forward, maybe more for the 6-year program, is there a way that we can start identifying, for example, I'm looking at some of the APD things. I know a lot of them are physical, but I know there's grants out there for that. Same with fire, probably same with other things. So just to say, I think we should have as a goal growing that federal column over time. And I don't know if there's any opportunity to do that in 2025 though.
Through the chair to Member Brawley, we have had that conversation internally specifically about the idea that as we identify the actual lost revenue from the state and other sources, that if there is funding available, we need to turn towards it. And the federal revenue opportunities around grants are not stable, but they are funding. And as we move through these projects, we will be exploring a much more robust grant exploration and grant acquisition program than has been performed in the municipality in the last many years.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'll just note, because I know a lot of times grants, you kind of have to have the project already baked or worked out. So it seems like this is one of the best places to look to for that. So yeah, another conversation for later.
Other questions from the members? Any concluding comments? Go ahead, Claire.
I think a couple years ago, you all assigned me to watchdog this capital improvement budget and plan, and that's why I keep nagging you all about it. But just to really look through, I really hope members look through this and make sure that your projects are in here that you want, and communicate that to OMB and the mayor. And if there's projects that aren't on there, work to get them on, and perhaps maybe not getting them on the CIB for this year, but to get them in the CIP so there's longer time for planning. And if there's projects that you that are on here that you don't want removed, to let them know. Just communicate a lot now, because then there'll be a lot less budget amendments in October and November, and it'll make for a smoother process. And then hopefully bond council will just get the information and bonds will appear on the ballot without a lot of work in December and January.
And I would say proposed budget amendments, because in that time, at the end of the process, it's much harder to pass amendments. Go ahead, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, Ms. Browse, can you reiterate too, so when the budget's gonna come out, and then what, if members are interested in influencing what that looks like, what they should do and who they should talk to?
Through the chair to Member Brawley, thank you so much. That's what I wanted to say. So we expect to deliver the budget on October 2nd, which would be the first time you would see the full operating budget and full utility enterprise and capital budget proposals from the mayor. In between 26 days that we're about to go into, please, let's set up time to talk. We can figure out if there are things that may not be included on this list, but our district priorities. Member Voland, forwarded me some information earlier today, and it is going into the downtown bucket, where we're going to say these are the things that have been communicated as needs, so we can be aware of them and recognize where they can be fit in as we move. There is the opportunity after the budget has been delivered to the assembly between October 2nd and I believe November 19th, which is Tuesday passage night, or certainly currently scheduled as such. And in between that time frame is when we should be talking about what the amendments might look like and what you would like to see changed within that budget, what may or may not be incorporated. And we can work through that process via the work sessions, individual meetings, however you would like to get that information communicated.
I think I've seen some social media traffic of high-level executives going out into neighborhoods and walking streets that are not in great shape. And so I am grateful that there is some true hands-on effort out there to understand the current condition. So, anyone else before we conclude? Go ahead, Ms. Braga.
I was just going to say, speaking of that high-level walk, that might be a different high-level walk, but it was very interesting. This constituent pointed out that the volume of fire and rescue vehicles that travel Peck Avenue that is deeply rutted, pitted, that we're actually beating up our equipment by not taking care of the road.
Yeah, so, but that's all to me a testament of the effort that's being put out by the administration to really grapple with the current condition. Is that I'm seeing evidence that those things are happening, and I'm grateful for it, because that's, well beyond the last number of years of effort to see and fix the current condition. So I think that's the result of our briefing. We are going to be adjourning just a bit early. Now's your chance. Last comments. Not hearing or seeing any. So everybody have a great weekend, and we'll be back at it next week.